What's going on, everyone? We're back with another True Detective Season 1 deep dive, this time for Episode 5 titled The Secret Fate of All Life. If you've been following us since the first episode, appreciate you staying along for the journey. If this is your first time watching, go back and start from Episode 1. We got the links in the description. No time to waste, let's get going.
Time to get on the wave if you haven't already.
So we left off in Episode 4 with Rust narrowly escaping the project's raid with Ginger as his hostage. Rust has Ginger set up a meeting with Dewall, who is Reggie's cousin and cook partner. Rust tries to sell Dewall on a meth supply deal, but Dewall is sharp and can see through it all. Plus, it doesn't help that Ginger is being shifty and has a beaten up face. Dewall sniffs out the setup, threatens Rust and Ginger, then leaves without making a deal. It doesn't matter though, since the entire meeting was to get a tail on Dewall, and Marty comes through and follows him. Ginger gets tied up and thrown in a ditch somewhere. I think Rust keeps him alive though, because it would have been out of character for him to just murder Ginger, but let us know in the comments if you disagree and think Rust actually killed Ginger.
I don't know if there are many better backdrops for tension than an old school dive bar. Add this to the list of scenes that could have easily had House of the Rising Sun bumping in the background. As badass as Dewall's call out was,
You got a demon, little man. And I don't like your face.
Rust does this weird thing to react that makes you think he wanted to close this then and there, like some kind of chord was struck once he pulled back. It could also be that the lengths Rust has gone to crack this case have started to show on him. I mean, he's coming off with an insane cocktail of drugs as he's having the meeting, since we can assume it's the day after the melee at the projects. He's emotionally hollowed out, overconfident that he can pull one over. The cracks are showing a bit, man. Clean it up.
Marty follows Dewall to this rural clearing, and Rust pulls up shortly after. We see Dewall's truck parked outside. Marty wants to call in for backup, but Rust is like, nah, since the extra police would warn Reggie and Dewall. The compound is booby-trapped, so they gotta be careful. Rust and Marty make their way in, and we see a bunch of devil catcher contraptions hanging from fallen trees. Place is eerie as fuck. They get to right outside of the cookhouse, and we can see the place is a straight trap house. Dewall is walking outside with some chemicals, and our boys are laying prone hidden. Rust tells Marty to go back and get back up, but Marty is a good soldier and doesn't want to leave Rust alone.
Fuck you. You ain't doing this without me.
You ever notice these boys do a shitload of driving? We've already got cutscenes that foreshadow this scene a couple times, so we know things are about to go down. You have to credit Rust's potentially emotionally abusive training with his father up in Alaska for these damn sweet navigation skills. Not dissimilar from the tracking skills of Hayes in Season 3 if you've seen that as well. This pairs well with Rust's tendencies and obsessions as a detective. The man just knows how to seek.
The two detectives approach the cookhouse with their guns drawn. Reggie is inside looking dirty as fuck and walking around in a towel. Marty and Rust outflank Reggie and they get him outside and cuff him. Reggie is just saying crazy ass shit about black stars, time being a flat circle, and the Yellow King and Carcosa. Marty does more exploring in the back shed and finds two young children being held as prisoners. Meanwhile, Dewall emerges from another shed with chemicals and Rust immediately tells him to freeze. Rust is holding both of these guys still with his gun, but it's a precarious position. However, Marty completely loses his mind after seeing the kids and walks outside and shoots Reggie right in the head. This wild ass moment gives Dewall a chance to run. Rust starts firing shots at him, but Dewall ends up tripping one of his own booby traps and blows himself to pieces. Yo, check this out. Look at Rust right after the explosion, immediately checking his left ribs for any damage, the same spot he took those 3 slugs in that Port Houston shootout back when he was undercover.
You would think with the adrenaline and momentum behind this whole operation that you'd be a little caught up in the moment. Then Rust just questions Ledoux out of the blue.
Why the antlers?
This tells us that he's heavily concerned with the narrative behind the killings. He's still analyzing the how and the why, where Marty really just wants to catch the W and put this one behind him. Ledoux's response is for sure not going to put this to rest. Who is he? What is Carcosa? Giving a cursory Google search and being a literature nerd with a little spare time on my hands, I looked up some old references of Carcosa in short stories and literature. It's a place or a city referenced by many big-time supernatural horror authors, including H.P. Lovecraft, a huge influence of the GOAT Stephen King himself. Most connotations relating to this place are not great if you look at the source material. Based on what Marty and Rust have already uncovered, this interpretation of Carcosa, or whatever the original Carcosa has inspired, seems pretty fucked up.
Fortunately, our man Rust is super sharp, so he realizes that they need to create a cover-up for Marty's murder of Reggie. He tells Marty to take the cuffs off before the blood settles. I think this is Marty's first body that he's ever caught. Rust goes inside the shed and sees the two young children who have been held captive. He then goes back outside and grabs an AK from the cookhouse and starts letting shots off everywhere to make it look like a shootout happened. One of the kids, a young boy, had been dead less than a day. It was missing since January. The girl is alive but catatonic.
The beer can symbolism aspect of this is pretty interesting too. At one point we see similarities between the scene that happened at the end of Ledoux's in front of Rust on the table, and then at another point we see a better representation of some imagery we've seen connected to the Dora Lang case. Kinda cool stuff. The coordinated cover-up is perfect because it encapsulates how these two grow to think more like each other over time, and that they just wanted to put this away with no assist. This is their case, goddammit. Should also be noted that if you ever need to doctor a crime scene, you should look for someone as neurotic and intelligent as Rust to pull it off. He's the perfect man for the job. Marty finally doing something beyond the letter of the law that does some good marks another character shift towards Rust's personal philosophy, which was bound to happen after all the bro-downs they've had post-breakup.
At this point, the case seems to be solved. Marty and Rust get major props from the department and the public. When you solve a case like this, your career is basically made. Marty gets promoted to detective sergeant. Rust gets a commendation for bravery. There's this funny ass line from Casada.
No, you couldn't manage to get shot?
Yeah, that comment was shockingly under the radar. It does make sense that Marty would be more comfortable with a victory lap. He's the kind of guy that likes to be admired, to put it nicely.
So after Rust and Marty solve the case, everything seems to be good for about 7 years. But in 2002, during an interrogation where Rust is assisting some other detectives with getting a confession, all hell breaks loose and it becomes clear that the case isn't solved. The man's name is Francis and he killed 2 people during a drugstore robbery. Francis is getting ripped apart by Rust and gets talked into admitting guilt on the murders. But as Rust is leaving the room, Francis plays his last card. He mentions the Dora Lang murder. This piques Rust's interest and he's on the man like white on rice. Francis says the murderer of Dora Lang is still out there killing and that there's big people who know about him. He says he's met the killer once. Francis will tell Rust more if he makes a deal and gets him off of these murders. Rust doesn't believe a word that Francis is saying, but then he drops an absolute bomb.
I'll tell you about the Yellow King.
Rust loses his fucking mind and just starts beating the shit out of him. The other detectives in charge get Rust to back off since they're more concerned with getting the double murder confession, so the lead on the Yellow King goes dead.
To put this under a microscope, we know that the interrogation room is a place where Rust is at the top of his game and he enjoys a fair amount of power and control in these situations, making the perp follow whatever path he's going to lay out for him. The sheer rage he shows here not only shows that he's obsessed with revealing the bigger picture behind the murders, including the Yellow King, but that he's effectively lost all power over Francis, even losing the confession in the process after it was a sure thing a couple moments ago. These are the same cracks we saw during the sit down with Dewall earlier in the episode. They just run deeper now.
Rust is now restless and needs to find out more, so he gets Marty to come with him to Abbeville to try and talk to Francis. But Francis is dead when they arrive. Apparently he committed suicide after a phone call with his lawyer. The surveillance tapes show no sign of foul play. The lawyer call was made from a random ass payphone, which seems sketchy as fuck since no legitimate lawyer is calling from that type of place. Oh, and the 2 officers who were escorting Francis have the last names Childress and Mahoney. Rust goes back to the original scene of the Dora Lang murder from 7 years prior, looking for any clues. He then does more deep diving in the police database, looking at all missing children reports that were made in error. He also returns to the abandoned Light of the Way school and actually looks inside. The inside of the school is fucking horrifying. There are these scary images of small children with wings and red eyes. Rust also finds those devil catcher contraptions lying around.
To look at what's driving him now, I think the frustration that he's been living out a lie becomes motivation to go back down that rabbit hole. There's the line about fate that seems to be what he's working directly against in the past.
And that is a terrible and secret fate of all life. You're trapped.
Doesn't help that the slam dunk informant pull the Jeff Epstein. I love this closing shot, sends home the rabbit hole concept and gives the viewer the impression that we're secretly watching Rust at the end while sinking deeper into the mystery ourselves. Very meta.
Alright, so that pretty much does it for the progression of the case in this episode. So let's move on to Rust and Marty's personal lives before 2012. Marty and Maggie go through some counseling and he spends some time rollerblading with his daughters. Solving the case seemed to at least get Maggie open to the idea of a reconciliation. Marty has apparently cut the booze for 5 weeks. He's proclaiming himself to Maggie as a changed man. Things end up going well for them for a few years.
Hey, I respect it, but we've seen this one before. How often can you really teach an old dog new tricks?
Exactly, man. The good years happen, but Marty isn't truly satisfied. He still feels empty in life and is longing for something more. Meanwhile, his oldest daughter, Audrey, becomes a bit of a screw-up. She's drinking, smoking, doing drugs, running around with bad kids. Instead of being appreciative for his family, Marty keeps taking them for granted and isn't attentive at all. The entire time, true happiness was right there in front of his face. By the way, the actress who plays Audrey also plays Starlight in The Boys. Things reach a crescendo though when Audrey gets caught naked in a car with two other boys who are 19 and 20. Marty ends up slapping Audrey in the face and she runs off to her room. Complete disaster situation in the home right now. Those two boys aren't going to get off easy though.
Unfortunately, this is a rough one, and Marty isn't known to be overly thoughtful in times like these. 2002 is a mildly different time, but I still cringe when he does this. It's in character though. Marty struggles with control, he wants it over each of the women in his life, and this mishap is also a reminder to himself that he was a pretty mediocre dad when it counted. We've seen an unhinged Russ circa 02, and now we have Marty as well. Both these dudes are not okay. You get a hint at this with Marty's voiceover. Seems like he became the bitter aging man he once criticized.
This feeling like life has slipped through your fingers.
Looks like times have changed.
You know, throughout history, I bet every old man probably said the same thing. And old men die, and the world keeps spinning.
There's another reference to the same path taking hold from Rust as he discusses alternate dimensions as if he just did ayahuasca with Aaron Rodgers in a Central American jungle. Through all his eccentric traits, the man makes a point. Both he and Marty find themselves on the path they always knew, reluctantly stuck in the present, looking back on the past, unable to appreciate what could lie in the future.
Rust also enjoys some good years after the case. He meets a doctor courtesy of one of Maggie's setups. He also becomes the best assist man in the state, and every detective around is begging Russ Cole to help them get confessions in the interrogation room. This is where he met Frances. The doc's name is Lori, and she was very smart, but eventually she and Russ separated.
This feeds into a common theme we see. Rust never really gets to enjoy happiness because he can't move on from the horrors he's crossed paths with. The cutscene after explaining the Ledoux shootout with Gilbough and Papania reminds us that he still holds immense dissatisfaction with the world around him. The scene itself is a perfect backdrop for the reminder. Bunch of dudes abusing kids, cooking meth in a rural wasteland is way more than bleak. Tragedy and life walk hand in hand, repeating themselves time and time again.
Also in this episode, the 2012 timeline has both Rust and Marty retelling their whole story to Papania and Gilbough. They gotta be careful in their retelling since their story is obviously a lie. Yes, Reggie and Dewall were guilty as fuck, but Marty fired on Reggie when he shouldn't have, so both these detectives could be in serious trouble if the truth ever came out. You could see Papania and Gilbough being skeptical, but both Rust and Marty have their stories rock solid, so it doesn't matter.
And you know why the story's always the same 17 years gone? Because it only went down the one way.
The fake story is that Marty snuck around the back while the gunfight was going on and ambushed Reggie with a gunshot to the head. Obviously, it sounds too good to be true, but there's no real evidence against it. This is also where we get the legendary "time is a flat circle" line. It's ironic that Rust is quoting Reggie Ledoux to Papania and Gilbough.
Like my grandpa always said, even a broken clock is right twice a day. The fact that they're in lockstep with each other shows that even though the bond is frayed, they're protecting each other till the end.
As we mentioned in previous videos, Papania and Gilbough believe that Rust is the murderer, and they bring up more evidence during their 2012 interview with Marty that suggests that Rust had something to do with these killings. Apparently, Rust left Louisiana for a bit after 2002, and they think it's weird that Reverend Billy Lee Tuttle died in 2010, right after Rust returned. They have pics of Rust visiting the police scene of the recent Lake Charles murder. Rust and his truck have been spotted in the vicinity of the crime scene 5 times by 5 separate people in the last month. They also know that Rust has a storage shed in Church Point that he's been using.
This 5-minute sequence of Rust reopening the case and Marty having a back and forth with these two might be my favorite of the episode, featuring a top 5 Marty line of all time.
Well, if you two talked to Russ, you weren't getting a read on him. He was getting a read on you.
Yeah, and when they're interviewing Rust, they straight up accuse him of murdering Rianne Olivier and pinning the murder on the Ledoux boys, but they really don't have any legit evidence, so they can't do anything about it, and Rust ends up walking out of the interview. So that's how the interview with Rust ends.
The system is after him again. Rust getting the better of Papania was a cool consolation prize though. The trouble is, Rust is the perfect guy to pin this on, but at the same time, he's got too much juice for these two. His walk out of the station paints an interesting contrast. An unkempt former officer of the law against the bureaucratic, corrupted machine that he's always loathed. It never accepted him, but there wasn't really mutual interest either. Our man's a born renegade.
In their interview with Marty though, they do plant a small seed of doubt in Marty's head that maybe Rust could be the guilty one. Anyways, that pretty much does it for our recap for this episode. We will see y'all in episode 6. Thanks for watching.